Well, the Ohio State Buckeyes had their toughest opponent of 2021 last night, easily their biggest, most difficult test in Big Ten play. And boy, did they come to play last night. The defense in particular had its most notable performance of the year, an interception when they really needed it. Another defensive touchdown. A big man scored last night for the Buckeyes. They also came up with terrific run defense, holding Penn State to just 33 yards on the ground all night. What did we learn about this Ohio State performance under the lights in the shoe during the Scarlet Out? All that coming up next on Buckeye Breakdown. We've got the whole crew together as we cover Ohio State with our instant analysis from Ohio State.
There's something that doesn't feel right.
Unbelievable effort from him today. Is E.J. Liddell going to crack the first team All Big Ten?
I think he can be the guy. I'm not trying to start a quarterback controversy.
He seems to have the durability. He certainly has the toughness. This is the question on a lot of people's minds here. Welcome to Buckeye Breakdown. Well, good morning, everybody. Alongside our coach, Tommy Zagorski, I'm Brendan Gulick. That was a pretty fun game last night. The Ohio State Buckeyes, I would say for a little while, felt like they probably had to sweat it out. It was not a super comfortable win, but obviously the Buckeyes did enough to win the game. I think there were a couple of reasons for that, the biggest of which was a lack of offensive execution in the red zone. Ohio State scored just one touchdown in 6 red zone trips. They did kick 4 field goals. It's not like they got nothing out of it. This game, though, could have been much more widespread if the Buckeyes would have maybe even scored 2 more touchdowns and kicked 2 field goals instead of gone all 4 field goals in that trip, or I should say in those trips. Coach, your overarching thoughts of a day that feels like a good, hard-fought Ohio State win against a team that the Buckeyes told us all week they weren't taking lightly, even if maybe fans and media were a little bit.
Absolutely, Brendan. As a football coach and as a football player, you come out of this game and you're happy. You're happy because you got a victory. Winning is precious. It doesn't matter who you play against, when you play them. I believe Ryan Day last night called it a gritty effort. I really think that, you can use the term grit. You can use what you want. But there was a lot of adversity last night. Ohio State looked sloppy at times. Penalties, self-inflicted wounds that really you haven't seen the last month out of this team. And that's part of the growing pains you have with a young roster. These guys came out, they played hard, but there was a lot going on last night. Brendan, I know you were there and it was rocking, the Scarlet Out. It was, the environment was, you could cut it with a knife. It was incredible. It was loud. It was exciting. And then these are young players that really, this is probably the first time they've really experienced this true environment. And, we talked about the Minnesota game was at night. The Oregon game was a nooner that kind of didn't really have a lot of juice. They fell behind. Ohio State fell behind. And really, you try to think, what other environment has Ohio State played in until last night that really they had the opportunity to have that deafening noise where the clap cadence comes into play and being able to overcome that, with a lot of different things with an offensive line that, unfortunately last night did not play their best game. They struggled at different times throughout. In Penn State, credit to them. First play of the game, what do? They come out in an even front. They stem to an odd front. Kind of things that probably that the offensive staff at Ohio State prepared for all week, knowing that Penn State wasn't going to sit in their base defense. And this is something that is, it's great, but it also stinks when you're a great offense, is that you're not going to see what you see on film every single week. And this is where the preparation comes into it, and forecasting by this coaching staff is preparing these guys for this. And I know you and I were texting back and forth during the game last night. There were times in the run game where Ohio State's run more inside zone and gap scheme runs than anybody else in the country. And there were times where you saw the offensive line look confused on who they were working to, who they were IDing, and where really they were trying to get on those tracks to really help out TreVeyon Henderson. And kudos to him. Kudos to TreVeyon Henderson. 19 yards of rushing for Ohio State in the first half, and able to come back in the second half with a big explosive run to kind of open this thing up a little bit and give the Buckeyes a little bit of breathing room, which was exciting to see. They overcame a lot of adversity. And then on the defensive side of the football, the defense won this game last night. And I don't know if, Brendan, you and I would have said this probably a week ago, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, and overcome the adversity where Steel Chambers gets ejected 7 seconds into the second half. And it was unfortunate because, as everyone knows that listens to this, I love Steel Chambers. I think this kid's going to be really special. He's athletic. He's big. He's physical. He's a great open field tackler. He takes a lot of pride in what he does. And to lose him on a targeting call that early in the second half was really difficult to see, and kudos to the defensive staff to continue to play hard football from that standpoint. You alluded to the big man touchdown, Deron Cage. Kudos to him. And obviously he's been at Ohio State now for like a decade, and finally he's able to get into the end zone with a touchdown. From that standpoint. But that touchdown was so paramount to the success of the Buckeyes because now it had Penn State reeling. And I know, Brennan, you were there last night. It flipped the environment in the stadium. When it's 7-3 at the end of the first quarter, Ohio State fans are outstanding fans, but also they expect a lot of points. They expect a lot of juice early in this contest. And C.J. Stroud looked like a freshman at times last night. He struggled hitting people, that were open at different points of the game. He was flushed out of the pocket a little bit. But one thing I will give C.J. credit for, his maturation as a quarterback, his preparation to get ready for this game, he didn't give up a sack. And I don't know if you would have gone through this game if you just watched the tight view and the pressure that was coming in, he was a very mature quarterback when it came to that, and made some throws that probably aren't going to get celebrated as much as they should have, and really has the opportunity to get the ball going downfield. But, I think Ohio State, the one thing that we never talk about on this podcast is the field goal kicker. And, to get 12 points out of Noah Ruggles, who's been outstanding. I don't want to jinx him. I'm not going to talk about what he's done to this point in his Ohio State career. But for him to be able to come in, make 4 big field goals were huge. And I know, Brendan, you said in the opener, you and I both predicted, I think you were 42-21. I was 42-20. So kudos to you. You were closer than I was. Great job, Brendan. But I also think, you and I talked about this off air, had the Buckeyes come away with a couple touchdowns in the red zone situation, let's say TreVeyon Henderson doesn't roll out of his stance, and I'm sure Tony Alford's going to explain to him, you tell young running backs, when you feel yourself in that situation, go into a motion and come back. As a running back, you are allowed to go into motion when you get that, when you start rolling forward. And I'm rolling forward right now on this podcast, and people are like, what's he doing? That when you roll that forward, as Brendan's doing it right now, as he headbutts the screen here, ready to roll, I see you do that, and then you motion and come back into it. I'm sure that's something they're going to address, but also they're going to talk about having the mental fortitude that it's 4th and goal on the 1-yard line in your home stadium, and you and everybody else and the 102,000 plus people in the stands last night knew you were getting the football. Everybody knew it.
Yeah, it wasn't a surprise. I mean,
it was not a surprise. Like, no one thought it's 4th and goal. Ryan Day was not going to kick a field goal from the half-yard line. He was going to give the ball to TreVeyon Henderson. He was going to let his large offensive line lean on these guys and let TreVeyon go make a play. And that's really, and unfortunately, TreVeyon didn't get the opportunity to do that because he rolled out of it. They'll learn from this. And that's the biggest thing that I said in this opener that's been a long-winded response to your question, Brendan. This team grew a lot last night. And they're going to look at this film. There's going to be some ugly stuff. There's just going to be some really honest conversations with these players and with the coaches. And when they look at this game and they go back to it, they're going to realize that you can't just give up hook curls all night long defensively. And then also you can overcome adversity when you're a good football team. And that's what I think happened last night. And you're going to see that. You're not going to see Ohio State come away with this many penalties again in a game. And then I've talked about this before on this cast. Self-inflicted wounds, and what I mean by self-inflicted wounds, you'll hear me say SIWs. What that is just non-snap penalties. And what that means is something that you did offensively or something you did defensively that the other team had nothing to do with. And that's where it's an
mental mistakes, right?
100%. Mental mistakes is a great way of looking at it. We used to always chart them, when you have that. But from that standpoint, it's an interesting way. But Ohio State to overcome that in such a great venue at this stage. I think it's going to be really, really special. I know we're going to talk a lot more about this game, but kudos to Ohio State for a very, very sound win against a really good opponent who 4 weeks ago was in the top 5 in the country, and really has lost to a couple teams that probably they thought they wouldn't have lost to. But, and the last thing that to promote Penn State, Auburn goes down and beats up on Ole Miss last night. That win starts to look a little bit better. Penn State has got to play in that environment. I guarantee you that Happy Valley, when they played Auburn and in front of national TV, was a different environment than State had seen up until last night.
Yeah. Several things there that you said I want to jump on. Maybe growth game is the first place to start, because it felt to me like Ohio State needed, with a young team that had been playing so well, and I've been firm in saying this. I don't think the Buckeyes are playing over their skis. I think this is legit, especially on the offensive end. I think they're that good. I think it's going to help them to have won a game during which they went through some adversity. And this is not to take away credit from Penn State. Penn State's a good team, and they showed it last night. I felt like Ohio State's adversity was far more self-inflicted than it was brought on them. Why don't we just start up front? Can you explain, with anything that you saw or what you were hearing from, analysis on TV or from the referees' descriptions, what was the deal with all of the snap infractions from Luke Whippler? Why was that so difficult last night for him to get that straight?
It starts between the communication between the quarterback and the offensive line. And one of the things that you'll notice when you see offensive lines, when they have a false start penalty, when there's some issue there, you'll see their head move. Garrett Wilson got called for one as well. Garrett Wilson is looking, Garrett Wilson never gets a cadence. Wide receivers never get the cadence ever. They're out of the perimeter. They're never going to be given a cadence. That's why you see like teams that huddle, like that used to old school huddle, they would leave the huddle early. Why? They don't need the cadence. They don't need to know it. They're going to watch and they're going to lean in. And I'm doing this right now in my office. They're going to have their foot up. They're going to, I'm like looking over here. Imagine the snaps over there. No, what they're going to do is they're going to watch the football. And last night, there were times, and you watch this, Luke, he was not confident. And what happens is you start moving that football just a little bit. That's going to be and then once it happens once, the officials' eyes are going to go to that. They're going to look for that. And pre-snap, that's what, they have that umpire back there. That's what that umpire is doing. And I want to say he or she, because there was a female official last night during the game. But when you see that umpire is going to look at that football right out of the gate, and they're going to see to make sure that ball's not moving at all. Because one of the tricks that I used to do as a center in college, and a lot of times playing in Division III, they don't really look at this as much.
Sure.
Is on a hard count, I would flinch my wrist. I'd flinch my wrist, and what would happen is the ball wouldn't move, but what it would do is it would give you a little bit of, and you could get maybe somebody to jump, and then you would be able to draw that from that standpoint. Also, Ohio State, because of the cadence with the snap cadence and everything else that was going on last night, I think that's where they got. And then once that happens immediately the chatter is like, come on, guys, we got to lock in. We got to lock in. We got to lock in. And when that happens, it's no matter what, it's either your team adjusts and you overcome it, or you struggle with that going forward. And that's where I think he was kind of in a situation where he understood, moving the football. And sometimes when they call a snap infraction, it'll be when everyone else moves except for the center. So they'll say, we're going to call that on the center because, and they never did this. This is something they've started doing about 5-6 years ago, is if the entire offensive line moves, that probably means that they were right and that center was wrong on the cadence there. And one of the things you'll see with a louder environment is you'll also see offensive linemen grabbing hands. And I don't know if because like last night was such a loud environment, maybe they had trouble hearing, but with the clap cadence, that clap cadence that you saw CJ Stroud using last night, it doesn't sound like it, but if you clap, it goes right through really the noise. And I've been privileged to play in some really loud environments, some deafening environments in my time, and especially in the SEC. And when you would see that, like that clap cadence, it would cut through the noise. And really, it wasn't much of an issue for us at a lot of times. But last night, for some reason, there was something with that clap that got into it. I did not see Penn State doing anything. I've also seen where defenses will clap to try to get you off rhythm and off that cadence. But last night, Luke obviously struggled with that. And then part of that CJ Stroud, and that's what I'm going to talk about, a little bit when the article comes out later today, tomorrow. You're going to see one of the things that I thought was interesting is that the relationship between the quarterback and offensive line, there was some disconnect last night. And when that happens, it's really tough to work off that cadence from that standpoint. And when you do that, it makes it really, really hard to operate effectively as an offense, which we saw last night.
How about just from running the football in particular? Travion Henderson had a 68-yard run that obviously almost brought into the end zone. He had a 22-yard run late in the game. So combined, those two runs go for 90 yards. Those were 90 of his 152 yards. So that means he had basically 62 yards on 26 carries. Mm-hmm. Obviously those are tough yards for a guy who's been breaking them off at basically 9 yards a pop. I was impressed by his toughness last night. I thought he did a good job of hanging in there when, he wasn't able to break off a big one. I think I've heard some things in some fan message boards just about being frustrated with all of the inside zone runs, all the runs between the tackles that just weren't working as effectively as, as fans are used to seeing. You've been an offensive play caller. How much do you want to do that because it's your bread and butter and because you trust Travion Henderson to do what he's capable to do, even if it feels like you're banging your head against the wall repeatedly because the defense is not backing down?
It's a difficult situation where you come into a game plan and you think that you're going to be able to run a certain way. And probably Ohio State looked at the Illinois game and thought to themselves, hey, Illinois lined up, ran inside zone and outside zone, and ran really the duo play that we've alluded to before, which is a gap play that it looks a lot similar to inside zone. You just ID it back, and what that means is now the offensive line's working downhill instead of uphill like they do on inside zone. And when that comes into play, that's what Illinois ran and a little bit of power the other night against Penn State. Ohio State watched that film and thought, all right, we're better than these guys up front. We have Travion Henderson. The same thing that you and I talked about, and I thought the same thing, that they would have been able to do that. Well, Penn State, the one thing that Ohio State didn't do that Illinois did do, they had an extra grounded tight end in like every single run that they ran. And what I mean by a grounded tight end was that there was a tight end in the box ready to go. Ohio State tried to get to that a little bit early, that 12 personnel run where they tried to run basically that mid zone off of Kate Stover and Jeremy Ruckert. Ruckert left because Stover touched that DN on the zone, and the DN came underneath, and then Stover worked back inside. What happens on that situation is Ruckert's told, hey, Stover's got him. You continue to work up through the cylinder of that man, up to the skybox defender that they got to. And that was really the first TFL that was kind of celebrated in the game early for the Buckeyes. And I think Ohio State goes, wait a second, if they're going to do this, we're not going to put this on our tight ends and have them block this way. They came back to the inside zone play, and the mindset behind the inside zone was that we feel we can get 3 yards a pop on this play. Well, the problem is that the linebacker movement, pre-snap and post-snap, and the gap adjustments that they were making by the defense by Penn State put the Ohio State defense or Ohio State offensive line in a bind all night long. And you'll see that whenever you see the offensive line and the centers pointing, like that's who they're working towards, either in the pass protection or the run game, whatever they're called. As they did that last night, as the Buckeye offensive line did that last night, there was a disconnect in who was coming on their combos. And I think this is where up front on the offensive line, you have to communicate. You have to communicate. Last night, they're making their calls. They get to the line of scrimmage. Hey, even ID6, whatever the front's going to be, whatever they're going to call. And when the center says that, now the rest of the offensive line is going to start making their calls. And a lot of people use single, double, triple as their front side combination blocks. And it did not look like to me that they were communicating well enough as an offensive line last night. They weren't making those calls. And on the backside zone stuff, I know you and I were texting back and forth. I know Thayer Munford got blown up on ABC for missing on the one linebacker. But also the question was he on a B? Was the backside tackle coming with him? Or was the backside tackle staying locked on? Were they reading somebody? There was a lot of question marks. And that's where Ohio State last night didn't look like they gelled as well. And one of the issues you run into is you see a lot of different fronts in front of you, and Penn State gave them a lot to look at. The Buckeyes were not calm enough to settle down as an offensive line, make the calls they needed to make, and then execute the assigned blocking assignments. And I think that was a big issue for them. That from a standpoint as an offensive coordinator, the question you had asked Brendan originally before I went down this road of like offensive line play where people are sitting there going,
well, no, but it's like that. It's important because when you look at the offensive success the last month, the offensive line has almost been an afterthought. They've been so good that it's allowed CJ Stroud to do his thing. Mm-hmm. And so last night when things started to break down, I mean, you really have to look up front right away to say, okay, what's going on here?
And that's also, they went to their mid zone, they went to their wide zone, they were able to get to those different plays at different points throughout the game. And I'm going to pull from another Big Ten game that I'm sure a lot of people that are listening to this watched at noon yesterday. The Michigan State-Michigan game, and I'm not comparing these two, but Kenneth Walker had a lot of negative runs in that game. And I don't think people realize that. The difference between Kenneth Walker's day yesterday and Travion Henderson's day, Kenneth Walker extended a lot of runs against a lesser tackling linebacker crew for Michigan, and a lesser tackling secondary. Penn State's linebackers last night tackled Travion Henderson and made him earn every single yard he had. We've watched Travion Henderson the last 8 weeks not be tackled by linebackers except for probably this incredible group of werewolves that Oregon had. Minus that, it's been his ability to just be better than whoever he's running against. Penn State's a good tackling linebacker group, and you and I both alluded to this on Friday when we did our pregame leading up to last night's contest. That's a good tackling football team. They're going to make you earn those yards. Travion Henderson probably comes out of that game with 200 plus if they're not able to get him down sometimes on those first or second tackles that they did. He was able to get the one run on the one stretch into the boundary. I think you're going to continue to see them work to that. And really for Ryan Day, he was hamstringed as a play caller. And you could tell there's nothing that frustrates Ryan Day more than when they can't run the football effectively. And that's where Ryan Day gets angry. You see him change on the sideline. He changes as a coach. When they're not running the football effectively, he understands it doesn't set up his play action. It doesn't keep the secondary at bay. It really forces them to show their hand a little bit more. And unfortunately, Ohio State became one facet at different times of the game. But having the ability of Travion Henderson to make those home run plays, as a play caller, you don't want to go away from him. Now, not to knock Mayan Williams. If Mayan Williams is in the game and Travion Henderson, for some reason, was not able to come back out of the tent, Ohio State becomes a vastly different team, without him, which I think is pretty much common sense for a lot of people here. But I know this, even me personally, when I saw Mayan Williams in the game, I'm like, oh, no. Get Travion back in. Especially as a play caller. And you even saw at one point, I think ABC may have gone to the sideline to look at Ryan Day. And he's like, what's going on? He sees him come in. And he's like, oh, come on, let's be able to get this. So, but they also, the other thing that they have not done yet, the one thing that I have not seen Ohio State really do yet is run CJ Stroud at all. There must be he's almost like a dog with like a collar that when he gets to the edge of the fence, he's not allowed to go forward.
Buzzes.
I mean, last night there were a couple times 4 or 5 yards where take off, get the slide, get the first down. And he just stops and he's like, I'm going to throw the ball. And it's I don't think
makes you think Ryan Day behind closed doors has been like, you will not run the ball ever.
I mean, it's almost like they have we have trackers on everything. These guys were trackers on how much they run, all these different things. Maybe Ohio State got one where Ryan Day goes into Gene Smith's office. He goes, I want a tracker on CJ Stroud to let him know when he gets to the line of scrimmage. Buzzes I got to get rid of the football. Because last night I thought he could. I mean, that's where we had the down the field against Indiana the other day. I really think they're maybe going to encourage him to just take off a little bit. Just a little bit. I know they don't want to hurt him, but 4 or 5 yards, go get the first down, slide, and be in pretty good shape there as well.
Yeah. Let's talk defense for a minute. I think we've hit on some offensive topics that have kickstarted this conversation, but I thought the defense, has more than earned their fair share of praise yesterday. Obviously, the scoop and score from Jaron Cage, which was both incredible and hilarious and fun to watch. Fun moment. One of the more fun moments of the year. Cam Brown coming up with a nice interception, although admittedly, if I'm being critical, when he was returning that interception, to me, it looked like he was running through quicksand. I mean, he was slow coming across the field. I don't know if he was trying to read something or what, but I literally remembered thinking to myself, what is he doing? Go. 4 sacks, 8 tackles for loss, and harassing Sean Clifford throughout the course of the night. By the way, Sean Clifford did an unbelievable job last night. I think he's pretty clearly the second best quarterback in the Big Ten this year. He played like a vet. He wasn't scared of the environment. I thought he was really, really good. And frankly, Penn State needed to lean on him because their rushing attack was totally neutralized. In 29 carries for 33 yards. Their longest run of the night was 11 yards. It's the Buckeye rush defense has continued to look really, really good. Thought the defensive line, a lot of it, both on rushing plays, but certainly when they were, trying to get into the backfield and speed up Clifford a little bit. I thought the defensive line played well. Jack Sawyer had a great game. Antoine Jackson, Ty Hamilton both played well again last night. So, I thought those were a couple of the highlights. And then obviously, we mentioned Noah Ruggles' name. Probably don't talk enough about the special teams, but man, you needed to lean on him last night, and he was great. And I forgot to mention Tyreek Smith. Tyreek Smith had a fantastic game last night. Zach Harrison looked really good again last night. So, for a team that has relied pretty heavily on its ability to just boat race opponents and throw up big, gaudy offensive numbers and point totals, the offense was good last night, but it was not its normal self. And they needed to lean on the defense in some high leverage situations right out of the gate. I thought the biggest, exclamation point they could have made was announcing their presence on the very first play they were on the field, right? The Buckeyes don't turn the ball over very often. And kind of a rare, weird, goofy fumble from Ruckert on like maybe a third effort play gets ripped out in front of the sideline, let the air out of the stadium a little bit. And the very first play, Noah Cain fumbles and the Buckeyes grab it back and the place went bonkers. That was a huge moment in the game to give the defense the juice that it needed. So, yeah, I mean, just from a 10,000 foot view, man, I was pretty impressed with the energy and with the scheme last night. I thought the Buckeyes looked good.
They did, and Brendan, I could not agree with you more about Jack Sawyer. I know you're looking at the stats next to you. Don't look. What was Jack Sawyer's stat line last night?
I actually don't think he had very many tackles.
He didn't make a tackle. He
did not make a tackle? I thought he made one.
Jack Sawyer did not make a tackle last night.
No kidding.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's where as a defensive lineman, you are flashing. Jack Sawyer, maybe I'm wrong. We got to double check this, but I'm almost positive. I went through it last night because I go, man, I thought Jack Sawyer played really well. I did not see him in the stat column. The official box score did not have Jack Sawyer getting a tackle last night. The reason I say that is you talk about this every single week. And I know you're a huge 33 fan. I'm a huge 33 fan. This kid pass rushes and makes it really hard on defensive linemen, or offensive linemen rather, the entire game. And he did that last night.
It's also apparently legal to hold him because it happens on at least one out of every 3 plays, if not more frequently.
As an offensive line person, there's holding on every single play. If they are inside the confines of you and you hold them, it's okay. When you're turning it outside the framework, that's when we get into issues. Yeah. And I think that's where, trust me, last night, I was more of a fan, I think, than anything. My wife's an Ohio State grad, OH, but she was like last night even laughing a little bit because I'm like, they're holding. I was like yelling that because I've never heard you say that in a game. And, from that standpoint. But I think what's really unique and interesting about this game and about last night's game from that defensive line perspective, you said it already. 11 showed up to play. We've been waiting to see 11 play. It seems like since he was playing basketball at Cleveland Heights High School. We've been waiting for this game where he's just going to come out. He's going to play. And I think it's kind of fun when you line up and you're a quarterback, you better call 9-1-1 because you got 9 and 11 on each side of it. When they line up and they're ready to go. And literally last night that you got to see a little bit more of that as he went through it. And I thought Tariq Smith played his best game. He was relentless. He got to he was working to the quarterback. It helped them work through. Antoine Jackson was reaped the benefits of this a lot. I always joke. I had lunch with a colleague or a potential client in my other line of work on Friday who was an All-American defensive end. And he and I were discussing, I go, when you went home, when you got a pass rush and as a defensive end, did you ever feel like you were going to get home on like a twist game or a stunt? He goes, no, I wanted to go beat a guy one-on-one. I go, exactly. And last night, Ohio State was able to get home on some of those. And he's texting me. He goes, well, it looks like the Buckeyes are getting home on some of this twist game stuff. I go, yeah, talking about us speaking into existence on Friday. But I say all that because it's important to see that Ohio State was able to generate pressure with the 4 defensive linemen up front. Now, there are times where they didn't, and that's where you saw, Clifford be able to set his feet and be able to hit up some of those windows in the zone coverage that Ohio State was running last night. But it's important. You know what? I
was waiting for this. I was going to ask it. I'm glad Yakov is. He says, Tommy, back in your playing days, were you faster than Cage?
Here's what I'm going to say. Cage plays at Ohio State. I played at Case Western Reserve. I'm not even going to put myself in the same hemisphere as him. I will give him the kudos on that. I did get clocked at a 5, like flat-ish 40.
I think he was at 5-1 last night.
They said 5-1 in the game. So I don't know. There's a lot that goes into that from that standpoint. But my kudos to him. What a great run by him. What an awesome drop in. But I really think that one of the things that you saw last night was just a defensive line that played hungry. They played fun. You saw guys smiling, and that's exciting to see from that standpoint. They rallied around a linebacker group that lost probably their second best player in Steel Chambers. I see he's the most productive linebacker. I still think Cody Simon's the best player in that unit at this point right now in the season. And they were able to overcome a lot of adversity where you get Ronnie Hickman covering a lot of people in coverage that traditionally he wouldn't. And I think what you see is that's where teams are starting to try to isolate Ohio State. Ronnie Hickman leads us in tackles. I think 7 of the 8 games this season. And Ronnie Hickman makes a lot of tackles, makes a lot of plays. Ronnie Hickman's not his coverage skills are not what keeps him on the field for Ohio State. And that's part of the reason Matt Barnes has gone to this middle of the field open with this cover 2 and cover 4 type looks that he's been bringing to the table, because it takes a little bit more pressure off those safeties when it comes to coverage. And I think when you see that with Ronnie Hickman, there were times where he got caught, and teams are going to continue to do this. They're going to continue to isolate our safeties and try to get them. I know they tried to get 5, and Shaw made a play. Shaw made a play last night. Really that was a huge moment on that 3rd and long where they tried, or second and long, where he tried to make the one-handed grab and tried to moss him, and he didn't. Shaw stayed with it, tried to work with his hand. Seven Banks was there to look at it. I still Seven Banks at times this year for me has just been really hard to watch. I don't know what's going on. I don't know if they're asking too much of him right now. I want to see him do well. I want all 22 of these players to be All-Americans. I want to see them do great. But he's one that it's mind-boggling at times, kind of what he's doing from that standpoint. But, that really from the defensive line perspective, like you said, to only have 1.1 yards rushing in a game in the Big Ten, you're not going to win the game. And then they did do, and I know Kirk Herbstreit alluded to this last night on the broadcast multiple times, that these bubble screens that they were running, and where they got this from, Indiana a week ago against Ohio State, in the opening drive, if you remember, started throwing these bubble screens and now screens out behind their big tight ends and let them block. Ohio State's going to see this going forward until there's a way that we figure out a way to stop this. And realistically, it's either taking one less guy out of the box and build up somebody bigger, because Ohio State's corners are talented. They're good players. They're just not real big. You put a large human being on a small person out there. Denzel Burke worked through it all night last night. He tried to work through it, but you put a 6'6", 265-pound person in front of him, that's just, it's a large human being he's got to work through. And until that gets rectified, you're going to see a lot of that going forward. And I think one of the things that's encouraging is that the Buckeye defensive line and their linebackers in the core have been able to defend the run so much better going forward than they did at the beginning of the season. You're going to see them be able to allocate a little bit more outside to kind of stop those screens and give the opportunity because you take that play out of the equation for Penn State's offense last night, they really didn't do much.
No, they really didn't.
I mean, I didn't chart it because I haven't gone back and watched it fully yet. I would be blown away if Penn State did not garner at least 80 yards of offense on really bubble screens. And what I mean by bubble screens, I hope everybody understands what I'm saying, is that when there's lining up 3-by-1 outside or 2-by-2, or they motion out to run a flare, something behind larger people. So you call it a screen because it's behind the line of scrimmage. It's going to go down in the stat column as passes. Last night, Clifford throws for 330 yards or whatever, 330 and change.
360, I think, 361.
360, I'm sorry. Well, you take those 80 out of the equation, he has more of a 200 and probably 80 to 270 yard type of game if he wasn't for those plays that they did. And, Penn State, they're allowed to do that. That's part of the game. Sure. It's different teams are going to do different ways to attack.
I mean, look how I don't want to cut you up, but look how
you're good.
Oregon beat the Buckeyes, right? I mean, Oregon beat Ohio State by running the football effectively and by Anthony Brown taking what felt like no more than 5 to 7 yard throws down the field. I don't love the term dink and dunk, but that's what they did. They just little gain here, little gain there. All of a sudden it's a super long drive and they, couldn't stop scoring.
Brendan, all of us aren't in life are not always going to sign that multi-million-dollar contract with the NFL, the NBA, whatever record company you get that deal with. The rest of us have to nickel and dime our way through life to be able to make that savings, to make that happen. And that's what these offenses do. They're going to take what you give them. They're going to put it away, live to see second and short, live to stay out of second and third and long. And that's what Penn State did last night without being able to run the football. That's smart football. It's a good way of doing it.
Yeah, I'm interested before we start talking bigger picture here. Ohio State's offense, the first 5 drives of the game, fumble, punt, field goal, punt. Now that's not what we're used to seeing this last month and a half. From that point forward, they had 1 turnover on downs, but they scored touchdown or field goal, scored on every possession the rest of the game, and had a defensive touchdown. Was there something that you noticed watching the first, half of the game, or really, I guess, first quarter and a half of the game, where you thought, okay, this notable change was made moving forward that at least got the offense moving down the field more, even, put aside the fact they were settling for field goals instead of scoring touchdowns? I would argue that Ohio State had probably its least offensive game all year. They had 466 yards of total offense last night. Most schools would celebrate that. It was a below average game fairly significantly for the Buckeyes. Did you notice anything that they started doing differently that allowed the offense to get kind of going?
Yeah, it was motioning the tight end and motioning the running back. 2 things that they did. When you're preparing your quarterback, the quarterback has to see a clean picture. The way to get a quarterback the cleanest picture is to get an empty. So when they started motioning TreVeyon Henderson out of the backfield, what it did was it enabled him to kind of see the picture. It forced Penn State to kind of show their hand a little bit more. They weren't allowed to leave the boxes as heavy as they were previously. And also, they're not going to leave the boxes as heavy previously because why? They know TreVeyon Henderson's not in the backfield. C.J. Stroud has not taken off yet this year, so it's going to force them to move these linebackers out. It gives him to see which leverage he's going to have, where they're going to be able to throw the football from that standpoint. The other thing that Ohio State did a really nice job of adjusting, and this is really, it comes back to the eyes in the box. It's Kevin Wilson. It's all the people that are up there. Motioning Jeremy Ruckert or Cade Stover, whoever was in at tight end at different points in the game last night, moving him around, because what that does as well is it forces them to not be pretenders. When you sit static as an offense, the defense can dance around and do all sorts of different things. They have to. They can do that. That's what they did to start that game off last night. And then what happened was Ryan Day was able to, and Kevin Wilson and the offensive staff, they motioned Jeremy Ruckert. When they motioned Jeremy Ruckert, what that did, or the tight end, it forced Penn State once again to show their hand. They had to adjust. They had to align. You could figure out where they in man or they in zone. And then also it allowed you to see what the box was going to look like to be able to have the ability to run the football as well, which obviously they struggled in the first half doing. But in the second half, we're able to get some bigger runs and be able to adjust accordingly from that standpoint. The other thing, Ohio State, I think, thought last night, and the way that it looked like in the openers with Ryan Day, a lot of formation into the boundary. Trips 3-by-1 into the boundary, meaning the ball was on the left hash, and then they were, instead of having the 3 to the field, they had the tight end, they had the H, and they had the Z into the boundary. They left that X out there by himself, and that was where, early in the game, you're like, okay, Garrett Wilson's going to have a day today because they're going to leave single-man coverage on him. They're going to put people out there because now, as a defense, you're into the boundary. You're worried about them running the football into the boundary because Ohio State's run zone into the boundary more than anybody in the country this year. You worry about covering Chris Olave. You worry about covering Jackson Smith-Njigba and Jeremy Ruckert onto that boundary as well with the run game, leaving Wilson kind of isolated. Because last night, Penn State came into this game and they thought to themselves, we're not going to let Chris Olave go have a game. They felt Joey Porter Jr. is their best, cover guy. He probably, his gloves were probably destroyed from as much as he grabbed on the people last night to try to carry receivers as the game went on. But, you say that right now, and Olave, when you put Olave onto that 3-man side, and it gives you the ability to kind of hide him a little bit and use Jackson Smith-Njigba as a way to get out. They're going to help each other. And early in the game, you saw him hit a couple slants to Garrett Wilson. And from that standpoint, C.J. Stroud missed a little bit early. And that's where I said we saw him regress a little bit early in the game. But he was able to go put the ball in places where those guys could only catch it later in the contest. Obviously his touchdown throw to Chris Olave was probably, it was almost breathtakingly beautiful. I mean, the ball seemed like it was up there forever, and then it was just finally like the good Lord was like, all right, he's there, dropping it. I mean, it was really the nicest throw he probably had of the evening. And it was able to get
that looked like a play to me that Ryan Day changed at the sideline. He was jumping up and down like a maniac on the sideline, trying to get CJ's attention and was signaling something or whatever. CJ clearly looked over, did something, said something. I don't know if it was a hot route or a full-blown audible or whatever, but I mean, Olave couldn't have been more wide open either.
And that's where when you're able to get Penn State, and that's why Penn State was moving around so much last night, and I alluded to this, I think it was Friday and a couple other times, it's a video game offense.
Right.
Ohio State sits there and they look to see what's going to happen. When you're moving around a lot, you kind of take that out of the equation. But also the disadvantage of it is when you sit there and you check and you look, the defense is going to have check and kill calls as well. And I know you and I have talked about Brandon Staley before, who's the head coach of the LA Chargers. When Brandon and I worked with each other, I say worked against each other. In practice, you work against each other. And the rest of the week, you work with each other.
An office?
But yeah, we shared an office. So Brandon and I remember, would be back and forth, like with this check and that check going back and forth. And I think it's important to see that, we always had a system check in there where it was a look, check, kill. And what that meant was whenever the other team looked to the sideline, we would have either a dummy kill where we would say, hey, we're going to show this, and then we're going to run that no matter what they do. Or we see them check or kill, we had a kill to go with it. So you would go back and forth, and one of the things you see is check, hey, alert original, whatever it may be, to see what you're going to do from that standpoint. And Ryan Day takes that off of CJ Stroud. He does it himself. And really that's where some of these NFL quarterbacks, the difference that they do that makes them elite is that they make those checks. And I'm not saying CJ Stroud's never going to do that right now. To put that on him as a freshman would be absolutely insane to do. Yeah. I think going forward, if CJ Stroud does become the player that he has the potential to be at Ohio State, you may see times where he makes the checks on the line of scrimmage as well, from that standpoint. But once again, Ryan Day handles that and did a really nice job of that from that standpoint. Sorry for the long-winded answer, but that's really schematically speaking, what I thought Ohio State did a nice job of. The other thing that they got away from a lot last night that they didn't run as much of was their split flow inside zone that they may have been a bread and butter play all year long. Part of the reason they got away from that was just because there was a heavier box. And at the end of the day, when you have that heavier box, that tight end split flowing back across, there were two unaccounted for in majority of those runs. And I don't know why I do that. Like I'm looking at the film in my head, but those two that were unaccounted when you were working back across, it makes it really hard on that tight end to be able to run off of it, especially when you don't have a quarterback that runs the football. With the quarterback that runs the football, you can account for that next guy with the eyes of the quarterback or with some sort of RPO that would be built in from that standpoint.
Okay, so I think a lot of people that watched Ohio State, Penn State last night probably spent at least some sliver of time, if not a lot of time yesterday afternoon, watching the other massive game in Big Ten football. And frankly, maybe one of the most widely watched games in the country yesterday, Michigan and Michigan State. It was a wildly entertaining football game, back and forth, clearly two good teams playing against each other. To your point, Kenneth Walker, kind of stole the show. He was tackled for loss, probably more than, you would think for a guy that had 5 touchdowns in a game. I can't even believe I'm saying this. I felt a little bad for Michigan because I hated the overturned sack, fumble, strip, touchdown in the first half. The referee's explanation was not good. I will never forget this as long as I live. He said the quarterback still possessed the ball when his right foot was on the ground. And so he was ruled down by contact. I'm like, his right foot was on the ground? You might want to explain that a little better there, man. I thought Michigan State probably got a little bit away with some PI on the fourth down play at the end of the game. But their freshman cornerback made a sweet interception to seal that game. Clearly high-level football from both of those two teams. I think I'm probably glad that Ohio State's got Michigan State at home this year because that team looks pretty darn good.
Yeah, I mean, the Spartans, I for the last couple of weeks, Brendan, I know you and I have laughed about this. I've been banging the Sparty drum. I think Kenneth Walker, I think he's the real deal. I think he runs the football well. He's playing behind an average offensive line. You saw last night, or yesterday afternoon, whenever there was a passing situation, I think Michigan State has to hold their breath up front on the offensive line. They've got guys that can go downhill. They can't pass protect against good defensive ends. And Hutchinson, I've praised him a bunch on this podcast already. I think he's one of the elite guys in college football right now.
I want to stay in my lane because I'm not you, all right? But I'm watching Michigan State's left tackle. I think he's number 62. His footwork's terrible.
When you're going against an elite pass rusher like Hutchinson and you are limited athletically, which he is, their left tackle, and I don't know the young man's name.
I think it's Luke Campbell.
3 weeks down the road, we'll know all about these guys. But when you go to set, one of the things in pass protection is you don't want to overset because Hutchinson does go inside on people. And I think last night the left tackle, he was so worried about losing inside that he would just set, kind of wait, and then kind of work his way through it. He got caught too much into the moment. You work a pass set all year round. You work your pass sets based on a 3-step, a 5-step, whatever the drop's going to be. You have different pass sets that you utilize. Your footwork's got to go in tune with that as well. You can't just change your mechanics on a given day because you're worried about, this guy's better than what it should be. When you work that throughout, and the kid was overmatched. I mean, that's what it comes down to. They didn't help him enough with nudges and chips. They didn't help him by leaving a tight end on that side. And then they thought and really Michigan State got away with this. I thought it was a bad job by them game planning. They thought the way to neutralize the defensive ends of Michigan was to run these nakeds that they weren't working. And they yielded 3 sacks on nakeds yesterday. I'm like, what are we doing? I'm like, don't call it again. Guys, it's not going to work. From that standpoint. So I think that's where you look at it and you see, they struggled a little bit in that standpoint. But kudos to Mel Tucker, and I've said kudos 10 times today. I will not use kudos the rest of the season. Mel Tucker and his staff. Wow.
What a turnaround, man. They
took this Michigan State team
train wreck last year.
People won't admit this. Luke Fickell left that team at the altar. Then we got to talk about this publicly. Luke Fickell looked at that roster and said, no way. Mel Tucker came in, went to the transfer portal, had a lot of hard conversations with a lot of young men in that facility. I mean, at one point, Michigan State had more players in the transfer portal, I think, than anybody in the country. They opened this thing up. They start bringing all these guys in. They played the numbers the right way. You can only bring in 25. They did a good job of that. They mixed in some good high school talent as well. They understood who the great players were in the program that were going to buy in, that were aligned. And they're sitting there right now, 8-0. And probably today when the polls come out, and this is a really unpopular opinion, they might jump Ohio State in the polls because they're undefeated.
Yeah.
They beat Michigan. They beat a top 10 team in Michigan. They beat a Miami team that had De'Aaron King, who was healthy at that point, where Miami people were talking about Miami being a team that could win the ACC and push for that. There's a lot. I mean, there's some quality wins here for Michigan State. I would have no issue with them. Yeah. And the reason I say that is Ohio State gets to play them. So I have no issue if they're ahead of them.
The rankings are, to me, they're backward looking. They are more about what you've done than what you're capable of. There is some element of projectability in it. It's not a straight off, hey, this is your resume and that's that. Right. But I agree with you. I think there's a decent chance that they may jump the Buckeyes because that's a big, big win. Not that Ohio State's win over Penn State wasn't legitimate. It is. Coaches and AP voters are gonna speak their mind. But of course, Tuesday is when we get the first college football playoff rankings to come out, and we'll find out where the committee stands on that.
Absolutely. And once again, the Spartans yesterday afternoon, proved again that Michigan, for some reason, and people are going to blame Jim Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh's a really bright person. Brendan, you've met him. I met him. Brendan, you got to intimately sit there and listen to him talk about how he got beat up in a tackling drill when he was in elementary school for 6 hours one night in Westlake, Ohio.
That was one of the weirdest stories I've ever heard in my entire life, by the way.
And we'll talk about that at a later date on here one day. Maybe we can do an outtakes on people Brendan's interviewed in his illustrious career. But Harbaugh's a smart football guy. He gets it. He knows a lot of different things. Just his management in the games in those situations are hard to watch. He rides the emotion of the game probably more than any Power 5 coach you see out there. Last night, James Franklin, who I've not been critical of or positive of, I think, on this at all, he looked very stoic last night. He was calm. There was a lot going on. He got into the officials a little bit, and there's times to do that. But, I mean, Jim Harbaugh looks like a lunatic on the sideline right now.
Yeah.
He's running up and down the sideline. He's jumping up and down as if – I mean, he looks like the guy when you were playing AU basketball when you were like, man, Shane and one of the kids got to get in the car with that guy and go home with him. I mean, That's who he looks like right now. And he's the head coach at Michigan. Bo Schembechler, who he idolizes and loves and talks about all the time, is, for Bo. Bo got into the officials, but he wasn't jumping up and down and being the way that he is, the antics he uses. And the reason I say that's so important, you are coaching 18 and 22-year-old kids. They look at you and the way that you act, that's where it comes into play. And you look at it and say, oh, buddy, like, they're going to see you react, and not to jump off the subject, and we'll get back to this, but one of the interesting things that did happen in college football yesterday, Scott Loeffler, lefty, a Michigan grad at Bowling Green, was ejected from the game for unsportsmanlike conduct. He's the first FBS coach to have this happen, to get 2 unsportsmanlike conduct penalties against the Buffalo Bulls. He's also the play caller. After he was ejected, they went on a run where they went 28-3 and upset Buffalo.
Oh, geez, I did not see that. That's absolutely incredible.
I mean, what you talk about, like, just an unbelievable situation that happened yesterday. And Lefty has always been really good to me. He's a great guy. But to see that happen, to see his kids rally behind, it was almost as if he got ejected, and it was like when a baseball manager knows that his team's not playing up to their, up to where they need to do, I'm going to get kicked out of the game. Jim Harbaugh does not have the flexibility as the head coach at the University of Michigan on national television to act the way he acts. His players get caught up in his antics, and they play this. Instead of him being positive, more about coaching guys, he worries about doing all these other things that really don't matter. Wearing a hat that looks like Bo Schembechler's, wearing the glasses, all this other stuff. Like, they're probably not even prescription. I mean, let's get real at who this guy is. And he's worried, and it's a shame because he's a very talented person. He comes from a long line of great coaches. And I don't want to speak ill of the man because I don't know what goes on behind the doors there every single day. And I've been in that situation where people look in at the facility you're in and go, you guys suck. But right now he sucks. And he sucks. And it's not a knock. And that's not because they're Michigan and we're the Ohio State podcast. He has not been able to perform in these big games. And I think it's because he gets in the way. I would never, ever thought I would say this. Yesterday, for me, Michigan needs to move on.
Yeah.
And they need to move on from Jim Harbaugh because Jim is more worried about Jim than he is worried about that M that's on his hat right now. And that's why they lost to a Michigan State team who, realistically, he's going to have to walk into that locker room today and talk to those young men at Michigan. First of all, he should apologize for his antics. I know it didn't result in the penalty, but he's got to really examine himself as a coach and as a leader of men because he's got this incredible group of players. And one of the things that was really prevalent last night, Aiden Hutchinson takes a lot of pride in playing at Michigan. He's a kid that grew up in Michigan. He's from Dearborn, which is a hard-working town. Ford plant there, rolls his sleeves up, went to Divine Child, a little Catholic school there. They do a tremendous job at churning out a lot of great kids, not just great football players, but great human beings. Their coaching staff does a phenomenal job there. I've known those guys for years. Aiden Hutchinson is one of those kids that from the beginning, when I first met him, he wanted to play at Michigan. Like, he wanted to be a Michigan Wolverine. And last night, when they lost that game, because he played his heart out in that game, you watch him just jog right off the field. And it wasn't unsportsmanlike. It was just the utter despair of having to lose that game because he knows that deep down inside, Michigan's probably a little bit more talented than Michigan State. It was tough to see that happen. And I hope that Harbaugh handles it correctly in their facility and kind of helps those guys rally behind. Does Michigan lose another game before they play Ohio State? Possibly. I think Harbaugh lost it. I think Harbaugh lost a lot of those kids yesterday.
I appreciate your candor on that because, like, somewhere along the way, when you can't beat a top 15 team on the road, I might have this wrong. I think it's 0-18 now. Like, something's got to give, right? After a while, man, it can't be. We don't have the dudes to do this. Like, you gotta, when you're a program of that caliber, Like you'd think that somewhere along the way you'd accidentally have it happen. It's really, really hard to explain, but I agree with you. I just don't understand it. I don't know if they're going to move on from him or not. But I thought yesterday was a really tough moment for Michigan football, and certainly for Michigan football alums. Just ask Taylor Lewan after his comments a couple of days ago, and he was pretty straightforward in saying that this game was going to go one way. So look, Michigan State's obviously in a great spot. If they win out, they're a slam dunk in the college football playoff. If they lose to the Buckeyes, they're probably not going to make the Big Ten championship game. It's, their season comes down to one game. Penn State's lost 3 games in a row now. I think it's going to be hard for them to be playing on New Year's. Michigan has extremely little wiggle room left to be in a New Year's 6 game. They can probably still do it, but if the Buckeyes beat Michigan State is probably Rose Bowl bound unless it's the team in the West, depending on how that goes. Minnesota has looked significantly better these last couple of weeks, and all of a sudden, that could be the team that wins the West. Iowa yesterday was terrible. They had 17 yards of offense in the first half. They got smoked by Wisconsin, whose defense is very good. Wisconsin's offense has been really bad all year. And this Iowa defense that's caused more turnovers than any other FBS school the last 5 years. They have not looked good the last couple of weeks. Purdue's defense is playing pretty well. The Buckeyes have them in a couple of weeks. I don't think Ohio State should be looking past anybody, even this Nebraska team who has played way better football the last month.
Nebraska's played like 10 games already. They're learning a lot more. That's one of the advantages of, like, your first game was like 4th of July for them. One of the advantages of that was like they've gotten to learn a lot more about themselves as the years gone on. And I know, Brendan, we rushed through the end of the Big Ten on Friday morning because of me, because I had something we were going out. But I did mention that Purdue-Nebraska game, saying that's a game that I thought was going to be a really good football game. Turned out to be a 28-23 game where Purdue and Nebraska, who were very evenly matched with 2 great offensive minds going at it toe-to-toe, and Ohio State's going to go play these 2 teams, going forward. Is Ohio State going to win both these games coming up? Yes. Are they going to win them convincingly? I hope so. I hope they're going to be able to jump out early and go do this. But are they going to give up a little bit of points against Purdue and Nebraska? Probably.
David
Purdue's
Bell is a dude.
Yeah, I mean, they've got some guys now. So it's going to be fun down the stretch here for Ohio State. But, the one thing that you look at, from a bowl game perspective, where teams are going, Penn State right now, I know we're putting them to bed right now. I think James Franklin, he won't publicly say he's going to be at Penn State. I think there's other things going on behind closed doors right now.
There has to be. How else do you explain a verbal misstep that egregious this past week? Like, there's no other explanation for that.
Or he's playing into it, like going, "Wow, they're not that big." I don't know.
I agree with you, but that just seems dumb to me.
I know this right now. I'm not we're gonna Ohio State plays Nebraska this week, and I'll be eating, sleeping, and drinking Nebraska as the week goes on. As a college football coach, when you eat, sleep, and drink who you're playing against, you don't make that kind of mistake. You don't, unless it's a calculated move. You had to have something in your mind where you're like, "Oh yeah, all right," to say that and just be a little bit more offensive and just try to throw some stuff at the fan, I guess, because that or like mind is in another place. And I know one of the things that he's done, and I don't know if this is still the case, but like during the COVID season, he has a daughter who's immune compromised. Like his family lived in Atlanta away from him when he was coaching last year.
Yeah.
And a lot of our families live away from us when we coach, even when they live in the same house as us, which is sad about the profession at different times. But I say all that because I don't know if he's invested in staying in Happy Valley. I don't know if that's the case. I think he's going to look at this and try to win out and potentially go sign another big contract and go another job somewhere else where he feels that he could be, a little bit more able to be, because he's looked at Ohio State now. He's won once against Ohio State.
Yep.
One of the things I think is He's been trying to climb this mountain, paint this picture at Penn State. But at the end of the day, he hasn't been able to win. He has not been able to go beat this team consistently. Do you look at it when you say, all right, I can go to USC, and I feel like I've got the ability there to be the one that goes and does that? You know, people talk about LSU with him. I just don't see the LSU connection.
No, I don't either. But the USC thing makes some sense, and I think USC
you can go win that conference.
Absolutely.
You can go build that thing,
and you don't have to in your own backyard. Like you got guys there that can do it.
Right. I mean, you within driving distance of campus. Oregon is probably the best slighted one-loss team in the country right now. They lose this game to Ohio State, and then like everyone forgets about them. Like they went and beat UCLA, they beat Cal, they didn't beat them in
you mean Stanford? They beat Ohio State, they lost to Stanford.
Yeah, sorry, they lose to Stanford. Yeah. I'm sorry, their one loss is to Stanford, which is like so egregious. But at the end of the day, like I know the resume, like we say, like if Ohio State and Oregon play again, I think everyone thinks Ohio State's going to win that game. But that being said, like that's another great team that has built up what they've done because of they took and Eugene is not like a place where they're going to go right around in the corner and there's some 5-stars hanging out in Eugene, Oregon. where James Franklin looks out his window. Oh, all right, that's a quarterback, a running back, 2 offensive linemen. There's a lot there. So when you do that, it's a little bit different, a little bit more enticing. Same thing in Happy Valley. It's not like he's looking around and he's like, all right, let's see what we got here. Oh, let's check out a local state college high school, see what they got going on. So it'll be interesting to see going forward kind of what, he does, from that standpoint. The fact that he won't publicly say that he's going to be there, convincingly, just makes you think that there's probably a possibility. I think we're going to look at 2 Big Ten coaches that are going to leave. I think Mel Tucker is probably the guy at LSU, and he's going to continue to win. These kids are going to enjoy doing what he's doing there. But Michigan State's not going to be able to come up with that money. Michigan State's not going to have the money if Mel Tucker continues to do what he's doing there. And he's also been anointed in the baptismal waters of Nick Saban, which also makes it a little bit different from that standpoint.
Since you're much closer to this profession on the coaching side than I am, are you willing to share your thoughts on this? Somebody like Mel Tucker, who has probably burned a lot of bridges along the way, but he continues to find success. I mean, I don't want to knock a guy. Look what his product is right now. It's as good as anything he's ever coached. He leaves is like somewhere along the way. How does that sit with you as a fan base, as a university? That is it really all about the money, or does he want to coach in the SEC? I mean, you could make an argument that we're going to go down a different path here. So much of this is about recruiting, and maybe the reason James Franklin can't win at Penn State is because he can't recruit at the same level that Ohio State's recruiting at, and he probably thinks if he goes to USC or LSU, but I'm in agreement with you. I think USC is more likely. You can recruit a better kid there. It's got to be really hard to recruit kids to Happy Valley. Game day is incredible. Like game day's 6 days, 7, 8 days a year if you're lucky and you got that many home games. There's got to be more to it. And I think that's why the Buckeyes have recruited at such a high level. They've got everything that you could want about the game day experience. They've got everything else that you could want for a kid that's trying to start his life, access to internships and local businesses. The NIL deals are proof of why this is working. Living in a big city, all of the developmental things that the program does to help these kids. I don't know if that draw is there so much at Penn State.
It doesn't. There's not the internship opportunities. There's not the ability for your family to have a better life. Living in Columbus, Ohio, there's a lot of great things to do in Columbus, Ohio. Imagine being a multimillionaire with a family who doesn't get to see you very often, living in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
That's where some of these people don't realize some of these jobs, as you look at, people live in these middle of nowhere type of environments. Their quality of life's not as good. And that's where I think you see a lot of different people change that. Like I've had the privilege of working at some great universities and living in some towns that were phenomenal, like Knoxville, Tennessee. Knoxville, Tennessee was one of the best cities I've ever lived in my life. I loved it. And one of the things that was great about Knoxville, Tennessee, the entire year, people eat, sleep, and drink Vol football.
That's all they do.
Ohio State, the city of Columbus, they eat, sleep, and drink Ohio State football. You and I could get on here the entire year and talk about Ohio State football, and people are going to want to listen and watch. Why? It's a rite of passage. People grow up on it. They love it. They encourage it. And they see these incredible people go forward and they celebrate them. I mean, look at the people that have made jobs for themselves that graduate from a place like Ohio State, and you just put in your resume, former Buckeye. How that puts you in a different light than anybody else when you look at it from that standpoint is remarkable. The same can be echoed about USC. USC has that ability. LSU has that ability. These different schools in these different areas give you a little bit different of a setup to do this. I always think about, and this is really a bad, and I may date myself with this, there's an old rap song by a rapper named Skee-Lo, and the song goes, I wish. And Skee-Lo is a short, frumpy dude, and it goes, I wish I was a little bit taller. I wish I was a baller. I wish I had a girl who looked good, I would call her. Wish I had a rabbit in a hat with a bat and a 6-point ball. Wish I was like 6'9", so I get with Leo because she don't know me, but yo, she really fly. The reason I say that is like that's what you have right now. Skee-Lo thinks, and James Ringo thinks, like, I could do what they're doing at Ohio State if I had that backdrop and I had that logo and I had those different things. At the end of the day, like, I mean, you're going to have to wish for that. And at USC, you have that logo. You have that. Thank you, my man. Or gal, sorry. But as we go through that, it's incredible to see that you have that ability to drive that and to bring that out. And I think when you see it at USC, you see it at LSU, there's those certain jobs that are the hases. Alabama, when Nick Saban took over, I don't know how many people here have ever been to Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Tuscaloosa is not a great town. I hate to say that. And I should watch saying this publicly if I ever get back into coaching and think I'm interviewing Alabama. You said Tuscaloosa wasn't a great job. But he's made it really special. And those people there do love Alabama football. They talk about it all year round. It's a big part of it. But Tuscaloosa, there's not, you're going to Birmingham, you're going to the big city of Birmingham, which I know Brendan has a strong affinity for your internship opportunities, for those different things from that standpoint. Imagine telling a kid you can get an internship in Los Angeles. Imagine that you practice, you look out, and when Pete Carroll had this thing rolling, I mean, there's celebrities on the sideline, different things that are going on. Texas is one of these places. Austin's a great, young, vibrant city where you're able to pull in. Texas Tech just got rid of Matt Wells because why? Anyone ever been to Lubbock, Texas here? Like, Lubbock, Texas, there's nothing there. Yeah. I mean, Lubbock, Texas, and Marietta, Ohio are probably on the same realm of like major metropolitans that you would like to go hang out in. I mean, and I say that no offense to our friends that live down on the river that are listening this morning. There's certain jobs that have that ability. And a guy like Mel Tucker, I've been to East Lansing. It's a great place. They take a lot of pride in it. But guess what? They don't breed and love Michigan State football all year round. There's people that love Michigan State football, and those are those diehard alums that are part of it. But when he goes and talks about internship opportunities and the ability to grow, there's a lot of other things where people go, oh, you went to Michigan State. Like, did you not get offered by Michigan or Ohio State? Like, that's still a conversation that people have to run into. He's done a good job, like I said, in the portal, getting players to come in. His iron is hotter than it's ever been. And I say all this with respect to Michigan State. Michigan State's going to appreciate what Mel Tucker's done for their program. You also understand when you go into these contracts, it's a two-way street. If Mel Tucker right now was 0-8, the conversation would be, was Mel Tucker the right guy for this job?
Absolutely.
Do we cut this guy and get rid of him? Being 8-0 right now, being in the top probably 4 tomorrow or tonight, does that mean that he leaves for another job, that's disrespectful to that program? And I think because they can get rid of you as quick as they do nowadays, it isn't as disrespectful as you think. I think it's a two-way street. It's the same way there's a transfer portal for players. These players have the ability that if they don't like somewhere or they have an outstanding season somewhere that's a lesser of an institution or a smaller institution, they can go to the next place. And I have a kid that I coach that is starting in the SEC right now. Was I mad at him when he left? I was bummed out he left. I was bummed out that he didn't stay with us. But that was a decision he made for his family. And he's going to be a 2-year starter in the SEC West. And, he got an opportunity that's different for him and his family and a different experience for coaches. When they go to a certain place, you can't be upset with them. When they leave to go to a perceived better place in their mind for potentially a better opportunity for their families.
Well, and I think that's why we're so lucky at Ohio State. It's one of those jobs that you want to stay in. Like, again, I don't want to put words in Ryan Day's mouth, but like he has never, ever given any kind of indication that this is a stepping stone for him. Like, this is the kind of job that I think Ryan Day is going to stay in. He seems to love recruiting. And if you're going to be a college football coach, that's a prerequisite, right? If you want to coach football, you want nothing to do with recruiting, you go to the NFL. But Ryan Day seems to love that part of this. And he's got an incredible job with infrastructure at Ohio State that is set up for your football coach to be successful. They don't need anything. The facility is top notch. The resources, you name it, you got it. They attract the best talent. They've got an incredible assistant coaching staff. The thing is a machine, right? And I don't know if there's a specific pinpoint start that, timestamp where it's like, okay, from here forward, that's what this is going to be. You could certainly point to a lot of Jim Tressel things. You can point to a lot of Urban Meyer things, but Ryan Day has taken he's taken a Lamborghini and put it on cruise control and driven the thing really, really well. He hasn't lost a Big Ten game yet. This is his third year. The Big Ten's not a joke. It's a tough league, man. It's So again, I think that's the difference between Ohio State and, frankly, if Michigan had the right guy there, Michigan's in that same light. They just can't figure it out. And the rest of the league, where if Brett Bielema somehow makes Illinois an unbelievable success story, they're not going to keep him.
Mm-mm.
They're not going to keep him. If Greg Schiano makes Rutgers a player, there's going to be a legitimate Power 5 school that's going to go to him and say, howdy, you turn around Rutgers. And how big, to borrow Mike Tomlin's words, how big do you need that blank check from a booster to be to get you to come here? Right? I mean, that's just what it is.
Brendan, he already did it once.
Right.
Schiano built Rutgers from nothing into chop wood and then got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers job. I mean, and what happened? Rutgers he left. They were hurt. They were sad. They were in despair. And then what did he do? Bring it back. He brings it back and says, what? I'm going to be the head football coach again at Rutgers. And what do? They make it happen. And that's where it goes to show you. I think sometimes it's, we all in life cultivate these relationships that are great relationships. One thing happens one way or the other. And it's no different in football. If you know you're the right person for that job, it's amazing how in whatever profession you're in, they will hire you back. Unless you go and gut the place and you're like, this, and this. And it's just like, it's so unforgivable. Then you cut that relationship. But it's proven in this sport, in business, in life, in relationships. I mean, how many people that are right now on this, they broke up with somebody, nah, I'm done with them. And then all of a sudden, a couple of weeks later, maybe a month later, well, you know what? Maybe it's right. And then it works out. That's what happens. So it just happens in whatever it may be. So it's a lot of different ways to get to it. And I think that's important in college football to remember that. You're dealing with, and a lot of us right now, and you and I included, Brendan, we're making conversation and we're discussing the livelihoods of other people and what they do and how they make a living. What you and I do professionally, there aren't a lot of people that are going to critique us and say, there's not 100,000 people watching us and saying, oh, blah, 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 blah. And then we end up losing our job because of it. That's what happens in this profession. So it's a little bit different like that. So it'll be interesting to see going forward, what Mel Tucker does, what James Franklin does, and we're saying this right now because it's two coaches in the Big Ten. And then now that ball starts to unravel, who then gets the Michigan State job, and this is where that offseason, I think this offseason, more than any offseason in recent memory, is going to be the most active offseason. And the reason I say that is this: I think a lot of colleges are going to hire current head coaches to replace other head coaching jobs. And what that does, it means there's a lot of movement going forward. I don't think there's going to be as many people hiring people that are coordinators at one program or another, just because you have to make sure when you go make this, especially with what happened with the COVID pandemic and a lot of people's budgets, with the money you're going to make, and you go say, we're going to go make this change, we got to make the change with somebody that has proven they can do it in that position. And when they go to do that, I think you're going to see a lot of head coaches moving, to different places, from that standpoint. It'll be interesting to see from where this all plays out.
Yeah. Let's kind of wrap up, just circling back to the Buckeyes here. And if there's something that stuck out, something that stood out to you that you are most taking away from yesterday's game, the biggest thing that you learned when watching Ohio State beat Penn State, what's your lasting thought, image, impression?
That Ohio State can overcome a lot of adversity, stuff that I don't think they could have at the beginning of the season. And I know we said this in the opener. I think the Buckeyes proved yesterday that they're a young team still, and they showed that a little bit more against a better Penn State team. But they do have the ability, the explosiveness to right that ship with a couple of different plays offensively, and that defensively they are not the same football team we saw, at the beginning of the season. This defense is playing at a much better rate. They're doing a lot of different things to try to, from that standpoint. And the defensive line, like you and I had talked throughout, Larry Johnson is starting to figure this thing out with these guys. And it doesn't take him very long. It's why he's probably arguably the best defensive line coach in the country. He's got these young guys playing, and hopefully we're going to see a little bit more of Jack Sawyer and JTT and some third down packages going forward. I think, adding those guys into the equation, maybe even line them up at defensive tackle or stand up, may give teams a little bit more fits when it comes to that in third and long situations.
I learned two things. One, that you can rap, and we're going to figure out if we can get you a record contract. And about yesterday's game, I think the biggest thing that stands out to me is the rush defense. There was something about this game. I sort of expected that Sean Clifford, if he was healthy, which he very clearly was, I thought he was going to play a good game. I didn't know what the numbers were going to be, but I expected Sean Clifford to play a good game. People don't remember this. Sean Clifford, obviously people have heard that he's, a Cincinnati kid playing at St. Xavier, et cetera, et cetera. He won a state championship in the Horseshoe when he was in high school. This is a place that he knew and lived and breathed growing up, and he was never going to be a Buckeye. This was probably his last chance to, win something big in the most hostile environment that he's probably going to play in this year. I expected him and his veteran presence to be ready for that moment. I thought he played well. I was pleasantly surprised that Ohio State completely eliminated the run game for Penn State yesterday. I mean, to have the longest run you give up all game is 11 yards. To do that with Steele Chambers not playing half the game because he was ejected, to dominate the line of scrimmage the way the Buckeyes did, throughout the course of the night, that's the thing that's going to stand out to me most. I'm sure I will remember as time goes along that Ohio State's offense was not as effective in the red zone. But man, that was a heck of a punctuation mark there on the defensive side. Everybody around the country is talking about Georgia's defense and how good the Bulldogs are, and they are. They're legit. This is 6 weeks in a row now that Ohio State's defense has said, hey, we made a change of play caller. We've changed our scheme. Our personnel has gotten more talent or more experienced with a group of guys that was talented to begin with. Your freshmen aren't playing like freshmen anymore. And the linebacking core in particular, which was a liability the first 2 weeks of the year, is now an asset. And I am very interested to see which teams on Ohio State's schedule try to establish a run the rest of the year, because that's Michigan State's identity. I'm sure they're going to try to do it. The Buckeyes are proven to be pretty tough to run the ball against. So that is easily my biggest impression from yesterday's game.
I'm with you.
All right. That was fun. Appreciate everybody joining. We had a ton of live hits this morning. I think 266 a year just a little bit ago. Thanks for joining us. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel so you don't miss anything like this along the way. We do this every week after games, and we do it several times during the week to talk about the the previous game and get you ready for the next game. Would appreciate if you subscribe to our social media channels beyond just the YouTube stuff, and you can check out everything you need to know over at BuckeyesNow.com. For Tommy Zagorski, I'm Brendan Gulick. We'll see you soon. Ohio State 33, Penn State 24. The Buckeyes with a 6th consecutive win. They're 7-1 and heading to Nebraska for a noon kickoff on Fox next week.
We've got the whole crew together as we cover Ohio State with our instant analysis from Ohio State.
There's something that doesn't feel right.
Unbelievable effort from him today. Is E.J. Liddell going to crack the first team all Big Ten?
I think he can be the guy. I'm not trying to start a quarterback controversy.
He seems to have the durability. He certainly has the toughness. This is the question on a lot of people's minds here.
Welcome to Buckeye Breakdown.